to honor the request when it's made of me, because that's the part of the way I do my part in service work and carrying the message, and hopefully somebody will hear something tonight that they might can connect with or relate to. I know it's going to help me every time I do this. It's always good to kind of remember a little bit about how it was, and it makes me appreciate how good things are now compared to the way they were. My sobriety date is October the 23rd, 1997, and I'm a member of the Big Book group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern Pines. We meet on Tuesday nights at Brownson Presbyterian Church. We have an open discussion meeting and a closed Big Book study. That's Tuesdays at 8 o'clock, so if you ever find your way down in Southern Pines on Tuesday night, come on by. I got to say one thing before I get into it about Brent. Of course, he already mentioned, about my athletic allegiances, I guess, being an NC State guy, and I'll try not to dwell too much on outside issues because not everybody has a love for that school like I do, or probably for that school up in Boston that he pulls for. But I got to tell you, a couple weeks ago, I was with a group of friends, AA friends, and most of the people I count as close friends today are people in recovery, but a group of us had gone up to the state Boston College basketball game, and as we were ascending into the upper levels of the PNC arena to our nosebleed seats, we were wondering, I wonder if we'll run into BC Brent, and by gosh, if we didn't run into him up there on the third floor. And but it was great. That's one of the things I appreciate about the program and the fellowship. Even though we weren't pulling for the same team that night, it was great seeing a fellow member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and made me realize that while we pull for different sports teams, in a greater sense, we're all on the same team when it comes to recovery. And I always appreciate that and love seeing people in the fellowship out there like that. It's a good reminder for me. I grew up just a little bit south of here in a town called Aberdeen. Perhaps you've heard of it, just over the county line in Moore County. And I always say that growing up, I thought I was in a fairly normal household. I have one sister who's 2 years younger than me, and coming along, I was provided everything that I needed. Now, I didn't always think I had what I wanted. I always thought that Mom and Dad could do a little bit more on some respects, but they provided for me. And I'll get into some general things about, I had some resentments as I learned through my fourth and fifth step, started developing at a very early age toward my parents. My dad worked for what was then Carolina Power and Light Company, and my mom was a church organist, and she taught private piano. And so some of my early resentments involved a very strict dad, a sister who I perceived was loved more than I was, and was definitely smarter and more talented than me, so I definitely had some resentments there, and then Mom forcing me to take piano and sing in the choir. So I had a lot of resentments that I didn't really start dealing with until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I say all that, I look back on it now and I can appreciate some of the things that my family did for me, even though I probably didn't when I was in the moment. But like a lot of people that I've heard share their stories in AA and shared meetings, I like many of those, never really felt like I fit in anywhere when I was growing up. I had some friends in the neighborhood that we played together in the afternoons, and went to school, and but I always sort of felt like I didn't quite measure up in a lot of ways, and plus I was a little shrimp. I didn't hit my growth spurt until I was about a senior in high school, so I kind of got picked on some about that, so that's probably another resentment there. But I was the type that would I can see it now. Whatever I could do to fit in or win somebody's favor, I'll do it. And I'm going to share this one example which should illustrate perfectly that what lengths I was willing to go to win acceptance from my friends. In middle school, we used to go up to the shopping center that was kind of a short hike from where I lived, and one of them dared me one day to go into a store and basically shoplift, go in and steal something. So we picked this store, I went in, and I got caught, and it was the Christian bookstore. And I was shoplifting a cross. But turns out the people that owned that store went to church with my family. So rather than police intervention, I got something far worse, dad intervention and the belt. So I would have much rather the police been called and had it dealt with that way. But that's just an example of some of the stupid things that I did as a youngster because I wanted to fit in. You know, if somebody dared me to do it, I'd do it. So that was kind of the way I was. And, you know, being an Aberdeen boy, when I got to Pinecrest High School, you know, I was thrown in with some of the kids from Southern Pines and Pinehurst, kids I perceived to be a little better than me. And again, I never felt like I kind of measured up, that I was kind of less than to some of those kids. And, you know, I always wanted to be a part of the popular crowd and never felt like I did. And I told somebody at my home group the other night, in that Christmas cartoon classic, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, my little group of friends kind of off of the courtyard from where the popular students were, we were the island of the misfit toys. That's how I felt. And so around my junior year in high school, I discovered something very wonderful. It was alcohol. And I know from hearing other people's stories, maybe I'm a late bloomer because I know people probably got started a lot earlier than I did. But I was at a little horse racing event we have in Moore County called Stony Brook. I don't know if any folks have ever heard of that. It's the old Stony Brook, not the one that's been moved out to the horse park in Hoke County. But I got dared again to walk up to somebody's tailgate party and borrow a fifth of liquor. And I went and grabbed a bottle of something clear and proceeded to drink it, a whole fifth. And I'd never drank before, so you can imagine what the outcome was. It was not very positive. You know, I passed out and got sick, wound up, somehow made it to my car. And but when I came to, after getting sick, I was the only one left on the property out of 20,000 people. And a sheriff's deputy standing over there looking at me. And I didn't really know what had happened. And so first time I drank, I got drunk and blacked out and got sick. And so, you know, I was able to get home. And when I got to school on Monday, I had a reputation with the crowd that I so craved to be a part of, and that was the party crowd. And needless to say, when opportunities came from that point on to hang with that crowd, you know, to drink and do other things, I was right there. I was right there with them. I had gained that acceptance that I so badly wanted. So when I got to my senior year in high school, a lot of my friends were doing the things that you do to get ready to go to college, and I was partying. And so when it came around time to try to go off somewhere to college, you know, they were all getting acceptance letters, and you know, I made a last-ditch effort a couple of times to get in some places and just didn't work out. So I wound up staying there at the community college there in Moore County, which turned out not to be a bad thing. It actually was a good thing for me because I probably, if I'd gone off to a college my freshman year, I would have flunked out then rather than my junior year, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. So I did the 2 years there and had a little job there covering sports for the local paper and doing a little stuff there, part-time stuff for the radio station. It was a lot of fun. And the drinking mainly was just weekends. But every time I drank, it's important for me to say this, every time I drank, I got drunk. There was no in-between for me from the first time I drank till my last drunk. That's just the way it was. So, but it was confined to the weekends, and there weren't a lot of negative consequences to it that I saw. So I worked at the college there at the community college and got my grades up, and I got accepted to my beloved NC State University. And I thought I had arrived. And so I get up there in an apartment with a guy I went to high school with and two other guys, and I'm ready to go to college. And at least I thought I was. Turns out the guy that I grew up with across the street from me, who was number 4 in my class and was a nuclear engineering major, was supplementing his income by selling marijuana. So I was basically, one of my roommates was a pot dealer. And I realize this is AA, so I won't go into a whole lot of that. But needless to say, that became a huge distraction for me, along with the drinking on weekends. And the only thing good that happened that year was they won the national championship. That was 30 years ago, and they haven't won one since. And so needless to say, by the end of that year, by the second semester, I was pretty much not going to class. Partying was all I cared about doing. And so around the end of that semester, I got a letter not inviting me back. Said, don't bother coming back unless you want to, to go to summer school or what have you. And so I was out after a year, and back home, back living with mom and dad after that one great year of being away from home. And so I had to figure out what I was going to do, and I landed on my feet. That radio station that I was working for part-time had a full-time job open up, and so that summer I took it, and I thought that was where I wanted to be. And by the end of the summer, I was doing the morning show on the radio station and became the news guy, and so I had to be at work every morning at 5 o'clock. And one nice thing about that is when you have to be at work at 5 o'clock, drinking the night before doesn't work very well. So the first probably 3 or 4 years I was doing that, again, the drinking was pretty well just on the weekend, because you have to get up that early and you have to be on the air. You can't be hungover. And so I managed on there for a few years, but as you can imagine, being the budding alcoholic that I was, looking back on it, the drinking started seeping into the weeknights. And I was able to manage it for a while. I could drink a few on a weeknight and then hold off and blow it out on the weekends. But as is always the case, that control eventually just goes away. Then suddenly I'm drinking a lot more, and it's interfering with work. And I wound up, too, as a result of the drinking, getting in a pretty unhealthy relationship, and wound up marrying that poor woman. And I've heard people use the term in AA about I didn't really get married, I took a hostage. And I think if you asked her that, she would probably agree. And she had no idea what she was getting into, because when that point came and we got married, that was where the alcoholism really exploded. Then it was drinking every night, and again, I was able to manage it for a while, and but as is always the case, there's going to be negative consequences. And I was lucky that I never got fired from my job, but I was not doing a very good job, and I wound up getting out of that and going into another line of work, media work that involved writing. So I didn't have to be at work every morning at 5 o'clock. Which actually worked out pretty well for me, because that job was more geared toward the evening, so I could drink when I got off work and didn't have to start back till the next morning. And so I kind of used that as an excuse and ramped up my drinking. And again, after a few years, I started running into problems at work, because when you don't start work until noon, and your boss thinks you're on the job at 9 o'clock, that eventually becomes a problem. And but I had a good deal. I had a nice deal for an alcoholic. I worked out of my home, so I didn't have to go into an office. So that was how I was able to keep that hidden from my bosses for a long period of time. I wasn't going into work every day. Had I had to go into work every day, that alcoholism would have been detected probably a lot sooner than it did. But where I started to hit the bottom was it was a night in February of '96. It's a night I'll never forget. I was, again, drinking a lot of alcohol, and not letting. I thought my wife didn't realize how much I was drinking. I found out later she knew I was drinking a lot, and I guess I must have been in a blackout state and was trying to jam a bigger log into the wood stove than would fit, and she was telling me it wasn't going to work, and I was convinced to prove her wrong, and I almost pulled that wood stove out of the wall. And if that had happened, I'd have burned the house down. So by the grace of God, I didn't do that. But the next morning, she had told me that she'd had enough of me, and that I needed to either get help or get out. And so she put me in the car and took me over to the hospital, which was almost, just a few blocks from behind the house where we were living at the time, and deposited me at the emergency room at the hospital and said, "I'll see you later." So I wound up in there, and they're doing all the, the blood tests and poking and prodding, and the nurse that was on duty that morning, or the nurse that I dealt with, happened to be Wayne, who's a member of AA. You know what I'm talking about?
I better use my sponsor.
Small world. Well, anyway, he knew right away He knew right away he had a wet one on his hands, even though I was trying to blame it on everything. I was trying to tell him that I wasn't an alcoholic. I can remember very clearly that Monday morning telling him that I was crazy and that I needed to go down to the psych ward. Because how I had it in my head was, if I get down to the psych ward, I can get a nice vacation for a couple of weeks. I'll be away from the wife. I'll have a nice warm bed, and I won't have to worry about anything. But needless to say, Wayne probably saw the blood work, and they told me where I needed to be was in detox. And so that's where they took me. And Wayne, he kept telling me all the way up there that, we'll get you into the psych ward, but if we put you up in detox, you'll have a better chance of getting into the psych ward when a bed opens up. I found out later that was BS. He was lying to me. And so they put me where I needed to be, so I spent a week in detox in February of '96. And I got my first resentment toward the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They usually took the people from the treatment center out to meetings, but we had an ice storm that weekend before I went to the hospital, so they weren't able to take us out. So they had a little ad hoc AA meeting there at the treatment center in Pinehurst there at Moore Regional Hospital. And so, they got all of us newbies out of detox, shook us awake and sent us down to that meeting. And so when they got to the end of the meeting, when they did the chips, when they did the white chip, they asked anybody, if you've been around detox, you know who the new people are. There's no question about who needs the white chip. So whoever it was that was handing out chips didn't even ask me if I wanted one. He brought it to me and said, "Here." That was resentment number one right there, because I had no idea what he was talking about. That's about the only thing I remember that night, because I was in such a fog, was that some guy handed me a white chip and here. And so, I get out of detox, and I'm given the option at that point of either doing the 28-day. They still had the 28-day inpatient there, or I could do the intensive outpatient. And my sick thinking was that the world couldn't get along without me in it for a month, so I opted for the outpatient, because I felt like if I was in a 28-day inpatient, my wife would get a hold of the checkbook and some other things and find out what a mess I'd made of things, and I couldn't let that happen. So I wound up doing the intensive outpatient there. It was like I believe a 6-week program, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday from I want to say 3 to 7. They let us out at 7 so we can go to a meeting at 8 o'clock. And the lady that ran that program, Nancy PK, wonderful lady, she's one of us. She was on me from day one to go to a meeting, and I was able to resist it for about the first week I was in this program. I felt like going to outpatient every day for 3 hours would be better than anything I could get in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what I was thinking. I just didn't see the need to have to go to AA. But she kept pushing me, and so finally I gave in. And so here comes resentment number 2 against Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought, well, I'll go up to VAS. I'll go up to the VAS meeting because nobody will know me up there. And which is hysterical, because when I got up there, half the people in the room were from Southern Pines and Pinehurst. And as soon as I walked in the door, the first person to come up to speak to me was Jack Leonard. And some of you know Jack. And he knew me from my job, and so he came up to me and wanted to make it clear to me that this was a closed meeting, and just wanted to make sure I wasn't up there doing a story about AA. And I assured him that I was not there for that purpose, that I was there for myself. But I still had a resentment about that, and I've got to share that laugh with Jack a few years later. So I'm sitting in this meeting in February of '96 in VAS, listening to all this stuff. And it just wasn't computing, because there was a lot of laughing going on, and it just really struck me as odd, because I kind of thought, when I was told I had to start going to these AA meetings, that it was probably going to be a bunch of people sitting around whining about why they couldn't drink. I mean, that's what I thought. And that wasn't anything like what happened that night in that meeting. I just remember that. And a couple of people gave me, shook my hand and gave me phone numbers, which I thought was really odd, because I didn't ask for them. But I had these guys giving me their phone numbers, and I'm like, thinking when I'm leaving, like I'm going to call that old guy. And so I just tossed the numbers and didn't really give it another thought. But I still kept going to, meetings, and I did what they told me to do. I got a home group, which turned out to be the Big Book group, the group that I'm in now, and got hooked up with a sponsor. And so after the outpatient treatment program went away, I was still going to meetings, and I was still married. And my wife at the time was very eager to see how things were going to go with that. And she even wanted to go to a couple of open meetings with me for support. She knew a little bit about alcoholism because her mom was an alcoholic. And my sick way of thinking got in the way again, because I thought, I don't want her encroaching on my territory. Like suddenly AA, here is a guy that hated being in AA, but when all of a sudden my wife started to want to go to meetings with me, I thought she was encroaching on my territory. So my thinking wasn't exactly right back then. And I think she began to see that even though I was doing some things that I was supposed to, going to meetings and working with a sponsor, he'd come to my house every Saturday morning, I wasn't changing. I wasn't getting any better. Matter of fact, the way she described it was that I was basically the same SOB that I was before. It's just that now I wasn't drinking, and that if I was going to be like that, you might as well just go drink. Well, that was all I needed to hear. And so I had a lot of resentments that I wasn't dealing with, and I just exploded. And I went back out off to the races that August. So I didn't even make it to my 6-month chip. I was already planning my acceptance speech for the 1-year medallion, and I didn't even get to the 6-month chip. And that was disappointing. And but after that relapse that Sunday night, I came back on Tuesday night and picked up another white chip. By this point, I had another sponsor. The guy who was sponsoring me initially, he had something come up work-related, and he and his wife, who was also in the program, had to go back up to Chicago. So I went back to Tom Ivester, who had hooked me up with this first guy, and asked him to help me find another sponsor. So he did. He hooked me up with this guy, Dick Starner, who was in that group. And I couldn't understand it, because he was an older guy, and I thought, I don't have anything in common with him. What in the world is he doing hooking me up with this guy? This is a waste of time. And but I came after that Sunday night of relapsing. I came back on Tuesday night, picked up a white chip, and back then we had a beginners meeting in addition to a discussion and a big book study. So I was headed back down the hall to the big book study, and Dick stopped me and said, you just picked up a white chip, you're going back to the beginners meeting. And that was kind of a bruise to my ego, because I thought, I'm not a beginner. And he said, yes, you are. You just picked up a white chip. Obviously, something didn't work. You need to go back to the beginners meeting. And I didn't come back after that. And I went off to the races. I thought, that I didn't have anything in common with people in AA, that alcohol wasn't my problem. And the marriage, as you can imagine, ended, and I thought getting out of that was going to be the answer to all my problems. And that was that last year and 4 months was probably the worst drinking that I had ever done, and far worse than anything before. And to the point that it was taking a toll on my health. I was telling Matthew riding up here, he said something that made me think about the Aristocrat vodka. And that's what I was drinking. That last year or so I drank. I was doing shots of Aristocrat vodka and chasing it with Budweiser, and that's just nasty. I can remember just gagging sometimes, getting it down. But I was at that point where I had to get it in me. And I'd be so frustrated, because I hit that point where I think, why am I doing this? And then I'd always say, I won't do that. I won't drink as much the next night. And you guys know the story. It just never works out that way. And so it just kept on. And the church I was involved in, that I married into, I was in a position of elected leadership in that church, and I was starting to sort of fall down on the job on that. And the pastors one night, finally after one of the council meetings, pulled me aside and said, "We need to talk to you." And so they did, I guess, what could be described as an intervention. They sat me down in their office and said, we think you've got a problem. and we think we know what the problem is. Do you know what the problem is? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. They knew I had been through alcohol rehab, a year and a half or, a year and 4 months ago. And I said, it's not alcohol. I've got some problems, with my family, and I don't have a lot of friends, and I'm broke. I was doing that alcoholic tap dance. I was just tap dancing all around what the real problem was. And they said, well, we think you need help. And if you need someone to help you get that help, we'll do whatever we can to help you, but you have to reach out for it. And I said, I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine. I'll take care of the problem. They told me later that they knew right away every other word was I. And so I left that night and went home angry, drank, but I didn't drink any worse than I did another night. I drank the same. And I continued on for a couple of weeks, and I don't know what happened on this one particular night. It was on a Thursday night. I was coming back from a building committee meeting at church, and I left early like I had done a lot of times at church meetings, because we always get up, circle up, and hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer like we do in AA. And my hands were shaking, and so I didn't want anybody to feel that. So, I'd always find a convenient excuse to leave meetings before they got over. And I was going home that night, and I got home. I had a yellow lab then that I had inherited from the marriage. I guess I had sole custody of the dog since we didn't have children. But this yellow lab waiting at home, wagging its tail, all happy to see me when I came in that night. And Labrador Retrievers they're smart dogs. That's the reason why they're service dogs. And that dog knew as soon as I walked in that back door that something was not right. I don't know if it was a look on my face. I don't know. But something snapped in me that night, and I said, I can't do this. I can't keep on like this, because I knew I wasn't feeling good. So I knew that I was probably having some physical problems, health problems, and I just felt real bad. And I was utterly alone at that point. That's how I felt. I was just alcohol, which had made me what I thought was the center of the party and center of attention way back, had just totally removed me from society. I was all alone. Even though I had people around me who cared about me, I was withdrawn from them. Then I sat there that night, and I went, for some reason, after I'd had my little relapse and I threw out a bunch of my AA books, I'd still kept my big book for some reason, and I knew where that book was. Now, that's a God thing right there. I went and got that book out of a closet somewhere, and didn't really read it, but I looked at it. And I guess subconsciously I kind of knew what the answer to my problem was. And I set that book on the shelf, and the next day I called my sister and talked to her. And that Saturday morning I went back to a thing at church and pulled the pastors aside and said, you guys are right. I'm an alcoholic. And man, I can't tell you the relief I felt when I actually said that to somebody, except this time when I said it, unlike I did, when I was going through treatment. When I said it to them that Saturday morning, I meant it. And I said, I know what I need to do. I need to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And but for some strange reason, I still had pride getting in the way. And when I went back out to the hospital that next Friday night for a meeting, and I don't know how I went from that Saturday to that next Friday. I went that whole week without drinking and not going to meetings. I don't know how I did that, but I didn't drink that week. And I went out to the hospital beginners meeting that Friday night and walked in, and I saw a couple from church, and I chickened out and left because I didn't want them to see me there. I was embarrassed. And I went another week, and as you can imagine, I was getting pretty squirrely, and I knew I had to get my tail back into AA, or I was going to snap and I would drink again. And I did not want to do that. So I went back to that meeting Friday night, walked in, and I spoke to that couple, and it turns out because it's an open beginners meeting, they have a son who's an alcoholic, and that's why they were there. They're Al-Anon. So I was kind of put at ease about that. And I knew a few other people in that meeting that night from when I was in before. So when they made the call for the white chip that night, I sprinted to the front of that room and got that chip. And I still have that chip. Most important chip I've ever picked up. I kind of knew that night in a fog, but I kind of knew that night that things were going to be all right, that things were going to get better. I actually, for the first time in a long time, I felt a little hope. And so I made up my mind that I was just going to do what I was told to do. You know, I started going to a lot of AA meetings. It's funny, for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to go back to the Big Book group there for a while, because that had been my home group, and I knew my old sponsor was there. And again, I guess that was pride getting in the way of going back there. But I finally, after about 3 or 4 months, I went back to that meeting, and it happened to be the last Tuesday of the month, so it was a speaker meeting. And after the meeting was over, I went up to Dick, the guy that had been my sponsor before I cut out, and asked him if we could try it again. And he said, by all means. You know, so we started that relationship over, and it's something to this day I'm truly grateful for, because, you know, we worked through the steps together, and you know, I ended up doing my 4th and 5th steps with him, which is vitally, vitally important. And of course, again, being the putting off type of person I am, he had to basically force me to sit down to finally do that 4th and 5th step. And I'm grateful that he did. And we had a great relationship. And so I saw him every Tuesday night at the Big Book group. And I still went to that Friday night. I went to that Friday night meeting, because that meeting was so important to me, because that's where I picked up my white chip. And for the longest time, it was the fear of drinking that was driving me. The fear of drinking was what was driving me to AA, because I just did not want to drink again. I didn't want to go back to like I was before I made the decision to throw in the towel. I just did not want to go back to that again. And so, but somewhere along the line, that kind of was replaced with just this overwhelming desire to want to go to AA meetings. You know, they came to be such an important part of my life. And you know, I found I was going, you know, they say, what is it, 180 and 180 or something. I went well past probably a year and a half, where unless I had some kind of a work commitment, and that did happen a few times where I couldn't make a meeting at night, I was doing that. And I was doing the steps with my sponsor. I was doing the things that he was asking of me, and I was doing service work when those opportunities came along. And I learned a very valuable lesson about 3 years. I was about 3 years sober. I was feeling good. You know, my life was getting better. My relationship with my family was a lot better, with my mom and my dad and my sister. I was able to start making amends, and things were going pretty well. And I started slacking back a little bit on my program, and some of my friends in AA started to notice that, you know, if you're at a lot of meetings and all of a sudden you're not, they start to wonder. And I'm very lucky, because I had a couple of guys that kind of knew me, and they cared about me. You know, they wanted to make sure I was all right. And so one of them called me up one day and said, you know, I haven't been seeing you at this meeting for a while. I need you to chair it. I need you to be the chairman out there in January. It's the beginners meeting out at the hospital. So I need you to chair the January meeting. And I said, okay. And I'll tell you, that was one of the best things that I ever did, because, you know, you have to get there early to set up, and a lot of people come, as I found out, a lot of people come early, and you still had the treatment center, so there was a lot of new sobriety, and I had people coming up to me and asking me questions, and it was wonderful. You know, it really was. It made me understand the importance of service work, because I don't know if I was helping anybody else, but it sure was helping me. And so I did that for that month. And as you can imagine, at a beginners meeting, January is a huge month, because everybody that makes the New Year's resolutions about not drinking, that first Friday night in January, we ran out of coffee. I mean, that room was packed. Now, granted, by the end of the month, you know, some of the folks that weren't as serious about it had been weeded out. But I just got a chance to talk to a lot of people, and made some more contacts, and from that point on, I really understood the importance of service work. And so, even though that wasn't my home group, when opportunities came up, when I was asked to either chair or lead a discussion at a meeting around the area, I would do it. And it was a great experience. And you know, somewhere somewhere there along the line, the obsession, which was really strong in me, that to drink, the desire to drink, somewhere along the line, it just went away. And when I was new in sobriety, one of my favorite books was that little red book called Came to Believe, and I read that. I lapped that up with a spoon, and I wanted to have a spiritual experience so bad, but that's one of those things you can't manufacture. But it did happen for me. A few months into sobriety, one night that obsession was just driving me up the wall. And I'd been reading my books, and I got down by my bed one night on my knees and asked God for some relief, and felt it. I actually felt a sense of relief that night. So that was where my spiritual contact with God became real. I'd heard people talking about it in the rooms of AA, but that night it became real. And so I've not, from that night to this night, I haven't doubted that. So every morning I get up and ask God to help me stay sober that day. And I also ask Him in my prayers if I'm in a position to help carry the message to somebody who needs to hear it, to help me to do that to the best of my ability. I do that every day. And every day that I've done it, I haven't drank. And but that was such a great feeling when it dawned on me one day that I don't have a desire to drink anymore. And when I look back at how I was when I drank and how I am now, it's just, I would have never been, you couldn't have made me believe that was possible 15 and a half years ago. And it's just a wonderful, indescribable feeling. And but along the way, for me, it became more than just a matter of showing up for meetings. I realized that I needed to do a little more. And it talks about it in the big book about to keep it, we have to give it away. And doing service work and doing my part to carry the message. And so, I started getting involved, and I'll never forget the first sponsoring a guy for the first time. And I've been lucky in that regard with the guys I've sponsored that have done pretty well. And I tell you, there's nothing like it, working with a new person and going through those steps, because you go back through the steps yourself, and it helps keep the program new for me. And so I just have never doubted the power of the program and the service work. And it's like I said tonight, when I'm asked to do something, I don't hesitate to say yes if I can. I'd have to have some really compelling reason not to do it. So, my sobriety, the quality of sobriety, which I really wanted, has been good. And, I've been lucky in a lot of regards, because over the course of my time in AA, I've not had to deal with a lot of bad stuff. I've had a few, I've lost some aunts and uncles and those kinds of things. But, I've been fortunate, and I don't say that to brag. I've had a lot of good times in AA. And, but this past year, especially the first half of this past year, was probably, without a doubt, the hardest, most difficult time I've ever had in sobriety. Last March 12th, Dick Starner, my sponsor, passed away, and that was tough. But a very beautiful thing happened as a result of that. The support from my friends in AA was it's indescribable. I was started getting emails and texts and calls and cards from other groups, concerned for me, because they, it was mind-boggling, and it was hard. That was a really, really hard situation, and my own dad was in the hospital at the time, recovering from hip surgery when Dick went into the Reed Heart Center, and his wife called me on a Saturday night and said that Dick had heart attack. He'd had a bad ticker for years, and she told me that night, she said, I don't think he's going to be leaving the hospital, and if you want to come see him, please do, because he was still pretty much there. His mental capacities were there, so I was able to go see him that night and talk to him, and it was a beautiful experience, because by the next day he was pretty well slipping away. And so I was with Marilyn and their daughter when they made the decision to let him go. And I went back over the next night to be with him before he died. And that's a gift from God. And, not a day goes by that I don't think about him. And so anyway, as I got through that, my dad passed away on May 17th. So within the span of 2 months, I'd lost two of the most important guys in my life, two incredible guideposts. And the power of AA was just beyond anything that I could have imagined after my dad died. I had people that I didn't even know that would call me. I got cards from other groups in AA in Moore County that I didn't even go to. And a bunch of AA people showed up at the visitation before the funeral that day, and even my mom and sister started to figure it out when they couldn't fit people in certain categories. They were starting to figure out, and I think even they were surprised at the number of AA people. The way AA reached out, reached its arms around me is something that I will never, ever, ever forget. I wouldn't have been able to get through those first couple of days had it not been for AA. And I say all that because, I would hear that, I've heard that along the way when somebody loses a sponsor or a spouse or a parent, and they send the card around and you sign it, and I would do it sometimes without really thinking about it. But boy, I'm going to tell you, after being on the receiving end of it, I can honestly tell you it makes a difference. I read every word on those cards the week after my dad's funeral, and it's still, even to this day when I look at those cards, it's very emotional, and I know that AA got me through that. And the beautiful thing is that my gratitude for the program is deeper than it ever was before. And the other thing was I never at any time during those horrible months thought about drinking. And I thought, man, that's the miracle right there. That's the miracle for me. And so I just I came through that and got through this past summer, which was hard. But I was able to be there for my mom, and I don't say that to brag. It's just, it was a rough summer, and her grief was complicated by some health issues and a cancer scare, and it was just not a pleasant summer. And I think I probably went to a few more AA meetings. And it's easy to be high on AA when times are good, but man, where you really appreciate it for me was when the chips are down, and I appreciated AA being there. And as I said, most of the people I count as close friends are people that I know in the rooms of AA, and those were the people that were there for me. And again, it reinforces that point for me that I need to make sure when those things happen in the lives of people that I know in AA, I need to be there for them. And just like I want to be here to carry the message whenever I can, because I think about the people that were in the rooms when I picked up my white chip, people that were carrying the message. My gratitude list starts with that. Starts with God, and then I'm grateful for the people that were here that helped me stay sober and helped me build that foundation that was important as I look back on it, because I wouldn't be able to get through stuff like what I went through last year without it. There's no way. If without that kind of support system, I'd be drinking. And I know given what was happening to my health, for me to drink again is a death sentence. Because I know that if I drink again, I'm going to be right back off to the races like I was before. And, I used to hear people say, I know I've got another drunk in me. I just don't know if I've got another sobriety. I used to laugh and go, but now I understand what they're talking about. And, I don't want to take any chances with that. And, so I try to adhere to what it says in the big book, about being granted a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of a spiritual condition. And I know what I need to do to maintain that spiritual condition. And the days that I do it over the course of time tend to be pretty good. And I know that if I slip back on it, I'm going to slip back into some old thinking patterns, and it's just somewhere I don't want to go. And, I just, as I said, my gratitude for the program is as deep as it has ever been. And I can't thank the people enough who were here for me, and I know I can't do enough to try to help the people that are going to be coming in. I want to do what I can. I want to give back as best I can to my abilities the way people did for me. And so again, I want to thank you, Brent, for asking me to speak. It's always an interesting trip down memory lane when I do it, and it's good to remember that stuff. And I just love AA. I love people in AA and what they've done for me. And I'm just one grateful alcoholic. So thank you.